Welcome to the Far Eastern University Public Intellectual Lecture Series. My name is Rita Cusio and I am from the Political Science Department. Our topic for today on media ethics is both timely and relevant, and we are privileged to have one of the pillars of Philippine Press. He is the former Dean of the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication and a trustee of the Center for Media Freedom and Responsibility. He's none other than Professor Luis V. Teodoro. Good day, sir.
Good day.
And thank you for accommodating our request.
You're welcome.
And it's quite exciting for us to discuss something, especially in this post-truth era. And sir, my first question, since our audience will be our students in FEU, is for you to help us understand what media ethics is and why is it important today in the era of fake news and alternative facts.
Well, to put it briefly, media ethics refers to the standards of behavior appropriate to media practice. Now, what does appropriate to media practice mean? Well, that means that we have to talk about what the media are and what their purposes are. The main purpose of media, of course, is to provide information and as well as analysis and interpretation. So anything that hinders those functions, anything that makes providing information or providing analysis and interpretation difficult is unethical. But that must be modified because it also includes, media ethics also includes being aware of the impact of what the media practitioner is doing on the subject, on his subjects, as well as on the public. So that means that you have to be careful about what you say if you're on broadcasting, or what you write if you're in print, or again, what you say if you're online. You have to be aware of its impact on people. On the people that you're writing about, for example, you can destroy a reputation, no? Or as well as on the public as a whole. For example, the public can emerge disinformed about issues if you don't do it, if you don't practice ethical journalism, for example, no? Or professional journalism. So media ethics refers to is specific to what the media are. I mean, we know, for example, that there are codes of ethics for doctors. Okay, so what decides the code of ethics for doctors is the character of medical practice. No, I mean, in other words, you're supposed to cure rather than harm, and so on. And then you also have codes of ethics for lawyers. And as far as lawyers are concerned, you're supposed to what? You're supposed to defend the innocent and see that justice is done, because that's the character of the law profession. Now, in journalism and in the rest of media, the fact that the media are all about information, therefore shapes the ethics. So let us say you're reporting on what happened at the Reed Bank or the Recto Bank, and you don't have enough information, for example, no? So you have to be careful that to get the information by consulting many sources, a number of sources. So one of the standards, therefore, of journalism, for example, is multi-sourcing. You get as many sources as possible. And that is crucial to one fundamental principle in journalism, and that is the principle of truth-telling. Okay, journalists are supposed to report the truth. And of course, there are a lot of people who will say, but what is truth? Anyway, journalism assumes that there is a truth out there that you can discover. It's saying that there is a truth. It's not saying that there are alternative truths. It's saying that there is a truth out there that can be discovered and which therefore you can report. You must report. Now, how do you do that? How are you certain that what you're reporting is the truth? You have to consult multiple sources. You have to do research. You have to consult experts and so on. Now, for example, if you're talking about the Reed Bank, okay, President Duterte says, I entered into an agreement with President Xi Jinping of China to allow Chinese fishermen to fish in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. Now, one of the questions that you would raise is, okay, is that allowed? So you end up talking to somebody who may be to an expert on the Constitution. No? So you end up talking to Justice Carpio, for example. Or also, if you're thinking about, but what will that do to our marine resources? Then you end up talking to somebody who's an expert on marine sciences, as well as you consult documents as well. So that means that you have to try to get at the truth by consulting a number of sources. Now that means, therefore, that as far as truth telling is concerned, if a report is based only on one source, then that can be ethically questionable. Then you can say, oh, well, is that really the truth? I mean, how do we know that what he's saying is true? No, so that becomes there are ethical issues that arise when, let us say, a report is only based on a single source. So the person who's evaluating news reports, for example, will look for, okay, did he exhaust all possibilities, all possible sources here in order to get at the truth? Because we all know that the truth is sometimes very difficult to get at. Yes. But there is a truth out there. That is the assumption of journalism. No? So in order to do that, you have to do all of this. But at the same time, as far as truth-telling is concerned, you also have to provide context. Because one of the ethical failings of much of Philippine journalism is the failure to provide context. For example, okay, you have, I can mention one case, you had the war in Mindanao. In 2000, then President Joseph Estrada declared all-out war in Mindanao. Okay. So what that meant is that the Philippine media covered what was happening in Mindanao and so on. So they generated so many stories and so on and so forth. And the Center for Media Freedom Responsibility did a study on how the war in Mindanao then was being covered. And we found out that out of about 6,000 articles, reports over broadcasting, reports in print, and so on and so forth, only about I can't remember the exact number, but I think only about 7 reports provided some background on the conflict. There was one particular case in which provided context and which enabled people to understand what was going on. This was an interview in the Inquirer with then the late Salamat Hashim, who was head of the MILF at the time. And they asked, among others, Salamat Hashim, what does the MILF want? Okay, so that's part of the context, no? So you can see that, okay, there are encounters, there are shootings, and so on and so forth, and there are casualties. Much of the media was just saying, okay, so many people died, so many people were killed, and so on and so on. But they didn't point out, what is this conflict all about? No? The same thing is happening today, for example, in reporting the clashes between the NPA and the AFP. Okay, so many people dead, so many people injured, houses burned, and so on and so forth. But many people lack the information that would enable them to understand what is this war all about. No? Okay, so for example, also during the peace talks, the aborted peace talks between the Philippines and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, there was between the government of the Philippines, and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines, there was no information on what the NDFP wanted. And yet the National Democratic Front of the Philippines has a 12-point program. But none of the reports even mentioned that, no, and so on. So that all of these things can be, so in other words, you have conflict. Conflict reporting is a particularly difficult area of reporting. Because there are people take sides and so on and so forth. No, okay. So what happens if you don't provide the context is that people misunderstand, or people don't have any understanding of what's going on, or they get confused. For example, in 2000, during the war in Mindanao thing, there was one instance in which a woman, a Muslim woman wearing the hijab, was prevented from entering a restaurant, and the security guard even pointed a gun at her. Because of the assumption that, okay, these Muslims are just violent and unreasonable and so on, and that everyone is dangerous. But because of the lack of context in much of the reporting of media. So truth-telling requires, being factual. And being factual means getting the facts, means consulting many sources. But it also requires research as well as providing a history. So that people will understand. Okay, so in the case of the reporting on the Reed Bank incident, okay, what is this all about? What is the exclusive economic zone? I mean, I know that there has been talk about that. What is the exclusive economic zone? What are the Philippines' territorial waters and so on? But it's necessary to recall that. To provide, in other words, the point is to provide some kind of background. So that's as far as truth-telling is concerned. And truth-telling is really fundamental in media ethics. So in accuracy, disinformation means, lying actually. Misinformation meaning defective, distorted information. I mean, these are all contrary to the ethical principle of truth-telling in journalism. So now the next question is, why is this important?
Yes.
Well, it's important for people to understand what the ethics of media are, so that they will demand that the media perform according to their own ethical and professional standards. Because, okay, in the Philippine setting and in many other parts of the world, the media are commercial enterprises. And as commercial enterprises, the media will listen to the market. And the market are the people. So if the people demand that do this, do a better job, and follow your own standards, follow your own ethics, then the media will do a better job. No? Why is it necessary for media to do a better job? So that we can understand what's happening, so that the people can understand, well, to put it in a grand way, to understand the world. I mean, that's what it's all about. The media are supposed to enable us to understand the world. For what purpose? So that we can evaluate what's happening and act as free men and women, because we are all familiar with the cliche, the injunction that the truth will set you free. Well, in that sense, the media help us get at the truth, and in that sense, help liberate us. Because when you have information, then you can act in an informed manner. And my illustration about this is, okay, how do we prevent dengue? I mean, okay, so how do we avoid getting dengue? We avoid getting dengue by understanding the life cycle of the mosquito and how it transmits dengue. And when you understand that process, then therefore you can act to prevent getting dengue. And that is a form of liberation. I mean, you're not just the subject of laws that you cannot understand, and so on and so forth. And basically, that's what the media are. The media help provide the knowledge about this world that will enable us to understand it, and that can enable us to be free from just merely being the subjects of things that we don't understand. So it is that important. So in the case, for example, in as far as governance, for example, is concerned, okay, what is foreign policy? What is the foreign policy of the present administration? Then, understanding that, we can either be critical of it, we can approve of it, or we can demand that it be changed, no, on the basis of our understanding of it. Now, the media can help us understand that. I'm not saying that only the media can do this. There is, of course, the educational system, there is the home, there is literature, science, but the media are among those institutions that humanity has developed to enable us to understand what the world is like. And if necessary, this is important, if in understanding that world, we see that there are certain things that are wrong with it, it enables us to have the means and have the knowledge, rather, to demand certain changes. So that's how important the media are. And as far as democracy is concerned, for example, I mean, how do we make democracy a reality in the Philippines. My own view is that democracy is not yet complete in the Philippines. That there is a democratization process that is going on, and political science people will. I mean, I know several professors in UP who are saying, "My God, the democratization process in the Philippines has been what, perennial. It's been going on, no end in sight, and so on and so forth." Well, media can contribute to the democratization process by arming people, the citizenry, with enough information for them to exercise their sovereign right to demand change and so on, and to criticize government policy and so forth. So it's that important, actually.
Wow, thank you so much for that, sir. And the thing that you brought up about Philippine democracy and its relationship with mass media reminded me of your personal background, and that is the fact that you were a political prisoner during the Marcos dictatorship. And because you were a political prisoner and a journalist at the same time, right after EDSA revolution took place, I would like to ask you, sir, to evaluate how media then and media now can be compared.
Media then during the martial law
Yes,
period?
during the martial law period, how difficult it was, and what were the challenges that you faced during that time, what ethical dilemmas you face as a journalist, and how does it fare with what is happening now with the Philippine media?
Well, one of the first things that the Marcos dictatorship did, and let's not look at it differently. I mean, it was a dictatorship. I know that there are a lot of younger people who say it was a better time and so on and so forth. Anyway, it was a dictatorship. Anyway, one of the first things that the Marcos dictatorship did was to shut down media organizations and to arrest practitioners. They arrested a number of journalists and so on. No? So they shut down print and radio and television. So, and then later on, they set up certain agencies to regulate the media. And as a consequence, you could be arrested if you violated certain rules that the Marcos dictatorship had put in place regarding media practice. So if you were critical of the first family, for example, no, then you could be arrested. And I know of several instances, several cases in which two gossip columnists, for example, were arrested just because they had said something about Mrs. Marcos. For example, one of them said that the miscarriage of Mrs. Marcos, which was supposed to be in the news just before martial law, Mrs. Marcos was supposed to have had a miscarriage. Anyway, he said in his gossip column, they didn't bury because they supposedly buried the fetus. And he said in his column, they didn't bury a fetus, they buried a hollow block. Anyway, so he was arrested when martial law was declared. Okay, there was also another gossip columnist who was saying, there's all this. Mrs. Marcos loves shoes and all that kind of thing. She was also arrested and so on. No? But of course, there are also other journalists who were reporting in politics, who were writing columns, who were also arrested, as well as a number of reporters. So they were arrested. They were kept in prison without charges for a number of months, and some for years actually. No? So, well, in my case, I was arrested because I was told only later when I was about to be released. I was arrested for writing certain articles in the Philippines Free Press, Graphic Magazine, and Asia Philippines Leader. I mean, before martial law, it was the golden age of magazines. You had magazines that had big circulations relatively. For example, Free Press used to have 60,000 circulation every week, no? And there was a magazine I was writing for when martial law was declared, called Asia Philippines Leader, edited by Nick Joaquin, our first national artist. Anyway, so they arrested people also from this, and I was arrested because they said, you wrote these articles and so on and so forth. And I said, why? Was it illegal at the time? I mean, at the time, it wasn't illegal to write all of this, and now you're saying it's illegal. Okay, anyway. But at the same time, they also said, okay, you were in UP and you knew these persons. I mean, of course, I knew these persons because some of them were my classmates. I mean, I knew Nur Miswari, I knew Jose Maria Sison, and so on. But in any case, what happened was that later on, the press was regulated, and so you could, and so if you wrote for the press that was supposed to have been legalized, there was an illegal press and there was an underground press. Anyway, the legal press, okay, if you were writing for the legal press, okay, the editors will say, wag naman ganito. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, we have to be careful about this. So what happened was that, of course, you couldn't say a lot of things. No? So my reaction at that time was, writing has ceased to be fun. It is no longer fun. Anyway. So at the same time, there was the underground press. It was in the underground press they were reporting the human rights violations and so on and so forth. Then later on, there was the press that was semi-underground because they were above ground, but they could be stopped at any time. No, and I was part of a news agency called Philippine News and Features, which was published by the Catholic Bishops' Conference. So it was reporting on human rights and so on and so forth. But we knew that at any time, because you were above ground, you could be stopped. So that was one of the problems. So it wasn't so much an ethical dilemma. We understood, for example, one thing, that while certain things were illegal, as far as the regime was concerned, it was also ethically necessary for you to report them. In other words, the law says this, but the ethics of journalism says this at the time. For example, the ethics of journalism says you have to tell the truth. You have to report the truth. So there were a number of articles that appeared, for example, in Philippine News and Features. And one of the writers is in fact very active today, Alan Robles. And Alan Robles used to write these satirical pieces, making fun of the regime and so on, of the Marcos regime and so forth. And we thought that was necessary. Also, there were reports on, what are they doing now? Well, some of the articles pointed out they did this also during the Japanese occupation and so on. So it wasn't really. The dilemma actually was between, the regime was saying you can't say these things, but the ethics of journalism was saying you have to say these things because you have to report the truth. So it wasn't so much an ethical dilemma, but a question of whether you're willing to take the risk. And then later on, I was in a magazine called Midweek, also during the martial law period, and Midweek also tried to do the same thing and so on. No? But we were constantly aware of the possibility that we could be stopped and so on. Now today, I think today, supposedly the free expression, press freedom, and free speech are protected by the Constitution. Now you have Article 3, Section 4. Okay, but the problem is that increasingly under the Duterte regime, the media are there's a lot of harassment on the media, a lot of threats, and so on. And from 1986 onwards, 165 journalists have been killed in the Philippines. And that has put us in the map of the media watch groups all over the world as one of the most dangerous places in the world to practice journalism. So these are continuing, the killings are continuing. For example, since 2016, when President Duterte became president, there have been 12 journalists killed. So, but in addition, you have a number of threats, harassments, and attacks on the press. Although press freedom is guaranteed, you have, however, all these attacks. So, which is really a paradox because the thing is, Article 3, Section 4 requires the government to protect press freedom and free expression. That is what But that's what's implicit there. No law may be passed abridging and so on and so forth. No? Okay. But what's happening is that there are these attacks on the press and threats on the press coming from government.